everyone, welcome back to another week on the Brush by Brandy YouTube channel, and this week we are working on this piece behind me. So this one started out with a really pretty color blend, and then I needed a transfer that kind of tied in these colors, and so I found this one from Redesign with Prima that ended up being absolutely perfect for this design. So I feel like it's very French country. We're going to do a couple different techniques, including putting that transfer on. Of course, the blending, it's got some stenciling, even a textured finish on the top, a faux plaster look that I think you guys are going to love. So stick around and let's watch this one come together from start to finish. Let's get started. Here's where I started on this piece of furniture. I picked this one up off my local Facebook marketplace. And like I said, this one gave me kind of a French country vibe, but the existing finish on it had a lot of damage to it. I started out by scuffing over the surface using my Surf Prep sander and a 220 grit paper. It had a lot of these little chips and nicks in it, and I knew that I needed to even them out to get them ready to accept some paint. I love the shape of this piece, but it's not real wood, so I went ahead and gave it 2 coats of my Wisal primer in the light gray color, and this is going to give my paint something to bite onto. This primer brushes on easily just like a paint, and I love it's going to be the perfect base for my blend. For my French country look, I chose 4 shades of paint, so I'm going to use a medium blue color down at the bottom. That's going to fade into a lighter blue, and then a soft green and a soft beige color. I'm starting out just by placing my 4 colors onto my piece. This is my first coat, my base coat, so I'm not worried about getting this coat particularly perfect. I'll perfect my blends on my next coat. This is just to get my rough color layout, decide where I want these colors to go and how they work together. Right now I'm just using a brush for each color, and I'm going to brush the colors into each other as I go. I'll introduce that dry neutral brush on my next coat. That's going to be how I really get the blends how I want them. I actually didn't end up using any water on this coat, and that's because this is just my rough coat, so I'm not too worried about getting it perfect. I'll use water on my next coat to smooth out some of these transitions. I've been getting a lot of questions on what my favorite brushes to use right now are, and I'm using them on this piece. So I'm loving the Klingon S50, which is their shorty brush, and that's what I'm using to lay my paint on. And then I'm liking, when I'm working the paint together, the Wisal Premium brush in their round 1.5 inch size. I'll link those brushes in the description for this post, but I basically end up using a brush for each color, and then usually a dry neutral brush on my final coat is what I use to work the colors together. With my color layout all decided, I'm super happy with the way these 4 colors work together. I'm going to go ahead and continue on to a second coat. Here's where I landed at the end of my first coat on my blend. I did put some pink inside the door, but I wasn't loving it, so that ends up getting painted over. This top was a little deceptive, so I ended up sanding it when we first started. You guys will remember that. And then I came back and I put a coat of paint on it, and that was when I could really tell that some of the unevenness in this top just was not going to be able to be hidden. And so I'm putting the coat of paint on here, but I'm actually going to end up doing a textured finish on the top of it to help camouflage some of that unevenness in this top. The reason it was hard to tell was because the original finish had a sort of a pattern in it, and so it wasn't very easy to see the unevenness until I put the paint on. But I'm going to consider this a happy accident because I really love the textured finish that's going to go on this top. So I let my paint dry overnight, and now that I've got my layout all decided, let's come back and give it that final blend. So in my hand, I've got my mister bottle, and I do use a little bit more water on my final blend because I'm putting it over the top of an existing coat of paint, and it's got that sort of chalky finish, and I want my brush to glide. So I usually just hit the surface with a light mist, and that helps my brush glide. Here I'm using that Klingon S50 brush, and I'm just placing my paint into its place. You can see up on the top I've got those 2 colors, that soft beige and that light green, and they're really close in tone. So those are going to be 2 colors that are really super easy to blend. But coming down towards the bottom, and my beige and my blue have a little more contrast, so it's going to be a little bit harder to blend. That's just something to keep in mind when you're choosing colors to blend, that the closer that they are, the easier they're going to be to move together. So here is that Wisal Premium 1.5 inch brush, and I'm just running it over the top, and I'm using sort of a swirling motion. So I wanted this to look like kind of that aged French country feel. I'm going to swirl my paint together to give it more of an uneven blend, more of a cloudy, moody look that goes with that aged vintage feel. This is not a perfect ombre. I'm kind of blending the darker colors up the sides a little bit higher, so it's more of sort of a U-shaped blend. And now I'm going to go down to the bottom and place on my dark blue, and here I'm going to swirl it together using that 1.5 inch premium brush again. This is a great brush for this purpose. It's got the perfect density and it's still soft enough that it's not going to pull my paint. It just moves the paint together and leaves these nice soft swirls in it. So this brush combination is one that's really working well for me, that S50 for laying the paint on, and then this premium brush for smoothing it out. I felt like I had some spots that I needed to even out, and so I came back and added a little bit more paint to them, and now I'm going to swirl those back in together. There can be a lot of back and forth when you're blending between putting your paint on, working them together, put more paint on, work it together. Do not feel bad if that's what you find yourself doing. That's a very normal part of the process, especially as you're learning the technique. The only thing you want to be careful for, if it does take you a few passes to get your look right, is sometimes you can start to reactivate the coat underneath and start pulling that paint. If that starts to happen, that's a good time to walk away, let your paint dry again overnight, and come back and start over again the next day. Here's where I landed at the end. This is my nice cloudy blend. I love the colors and the overall moodiness of it. So now I want to add some interest to the front of this piece. So I'm going to add the alberry transfer. This is from Redesign with Prima, but I'm going to cut this apart and make it fit my piece. This is one thing I love about transfers is you don't have to apply them straight as they exist on the paper. You can cut them into any shape or size to fit the piece that you're wanting to put it on. So this has my two doors down the center, so I ended up cutting my transfer exactly down the center, and I'm going to place half on one side and half on the other. I'm also going to have plenty of transfer left over that I will actually get another piece or possibly more out of this transfer. Then I cut around the edges of some of my flowers into kind of an irregular design where they would naturally cut off, and I'm going to rub it onto my piece. Once I've rubbed over the entire surface, I'm going to start pulling back on it from one corner. I pull back on the clear backing sheet, rubbing as I go, making sure that it's all attaching to my piece and not pulling away with that clear backing. Once the transfer is attached, I do go over all of it with my fingers just to make sure it's all laid. I don't have any edges that are raised, and then I'm just going to lightly burnish it with a soft cloth to make sure it's seated seamlessly into my piece. Applying transfers is itself an art form, and it does take some practice to learn how to get them right, and then you want to make sure that you go nice and slow when you're putting your transfer on so that you don't end up tearing it and getting irregular spots. It's better to just work it slow and take your time when you're doing it to get the best results. All right, with my doors all done, I'm going to go ahead and pay some attention and put some transfer up onto this top drawer as well. So this was actually a piece from the bottom of my transfer that I cut out and I isolated. It's had that same cut down the center, so I just matched those up in the middle, and now I'm going to rub those together, and this is going to be a little swag that goes across the top drawer. This transfer really suited the shape and the style of this piece really well. I love that I was able to cut it out and make it customized to the piece too. So here's where I am with my transfer all applied, only I felt like it was a little bit too new and shiny. I want to kind of dirty it up a little bit. The first thing I'm going to do is go back and work on that top. So I took a little bit of my green paint and I'm going to mix in some salt wash. This is a texture additive. It's a soft powder that you mix into your paint, and you can stir it up to get as smooth of a formula as you want, and it can be as thick or as thin as you want. So I stirred it up till I had the consistency of about a creamy peanut butter. And then I'm going to go ahead and apply this onto the top of my piece. I just took my peanut butter mixture and I put it into dollops across the top of my piece. And then I'm going to take a bowl scraper, which is actually a kitchen spatula tool, and I'm going to scrape a layer of this over the top of my furniture piece. This is going to give me the look of almost a plaster, so I wanted to have some irregularities in it, places where my bowl scraper sort of skipped over the top and didn't get a full layer on, some places where it made little patterns in the texture. I wanted that little bit of irregularity. This is also helping to camouflage those irregularities in the top of the piece, but it's going to give me a beautiful finish as well. So remember how I said I wanted to kind of age this piece a little bit? Let's dirty it up with some waxes. I do love shading with some waxes. I'm going to take a natural bristle artist brush and I'm just going to ride a bead of black wax into the inner edge of this piece. I like a little bit thicker and more saturated wax when I'm shading with waxes, and so these are Jolie waxes. They're very nice and saturated and potent for this. Once I've got that little bit of eyeliner around the edges, I'm going to come back with a slightly bigger natural artist brush and I'm going to add a little bit of brown wax on top of that. This combination of brown and black makes it look a little bit more natural and authentic. I am applying these waxes onto unsealed paint. If you're a little uncomfortable working with waxes, you may want to seal your paint before doing this because once they're on, they're near impossible to get back off again with this oil-based wax. That's because the raw paint is going to absorb those waxes and it's not going to let them go. And so just make sure and put a coat of sealer on them if you're a little unsure about doing this, and that will protect your paint underneath, and then you can add your waxes over top of your clear coat. I actually really like the way that the raw paint accepts the wax and just gives me this kind of hazy, dirty look around the edges. That's exactly the look that I'm going for. The sides of this piece are almost framed out like picture frames, and so I felt like they were meant to hold something in there, but I didn't want to do the transfer on the sides because I felt like it would be too much, and I really wanted that to be the feature of the front. So I chose this acanthus leaf stencil. This is from Royal Design Studios, and it's a beautiful stencil, and I'm going to go ahead and place a faded out version of this on the sides of my piece. I'm using a white gold gilding wax. This is from Redesign with Prima, and I'm just using a natural bristle stencil brush, and I'm using a circular motion to apply it in the center of my stencil. I'm doing it heavy up the center of my stencil, and then I'm letting it fade out as my brush has less and less wax on it. This will fade out as I get towards the edges. That's going to provide this nice faded edge, aged look to the stencil. You can see when I pull the stencil back away how the edges are kind of softened. Let's repeat the same process on the other side, applying my bead of black wax around the edges, swirling in that brown wax, and then we're going to do the stencil in the middle. With my second stencil applied, I'm going to call this piece complete. I went ahead and sprayed this with 2 coats of clear coat over the top to seal it, and this is my final look on staging day. I staged this one with some art that reminded me of the countryside and then a vase of flowers in an old teapot. And you guys, this is our final look. I did replace the hardware with some new hardware from Hobby Lobby. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, you can find links for everything I use in the description for this post, and more Brush by Brandy on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and YouTube. Don't forget to click that subscribe button and check out my website at brushbybrandy.com.